Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. Joe Biden comes out with strong words regarding Russia. Let's dive right in. And I want to give you my thoughts on how this could be a diversionary tactic. We've seen this so many times with politicians throughout history. Let's dive into the article from CNBC. Biden says a Russian invasion of Ukraine would change the world. Key points. President Joe Biden cast a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine in stark historic terms Tuesday, saying it would be the largest invasion since World War II. Biden's remarks reflect a growing consensus among NATO allies that any conflict in Ukraine is unlikely to be confined to a small area or a short window of time. And then Biden made remarks from some gift job that who cares? President Biden cast a potential Russian invasion in historic terms. Going through that, okay, tens of thousands of Russian troops who have been amassing in the Russian-Ukrainian border were to launch an incursion into Ukrainian territory. So when we talked about the remarks, this is very different than 2014 when we were dealing with Crimea. And this was they're saying that this is because Crimea was largely contained. And the fighting lasting a little over a month. Ukraine ultimately withdrawing its troops. Biden made remarks during the surprise. Okay, yes. Why would they include that in there? Russian President Vladimir Putin has been building up Russian military presence in Ukraine for months. Okay, so now is what I think is interesting. Let's go back and remember the stories that we've done today and throughout the last week or so, where we're really starting to see how detrimental consumer price inflation is to the administration and probably to most Democrats heading into this midterm election. So if you go back in history and you look at the politician playbook, right at the top, you're going to see if you're having a problem, create a diversion. Right below that, it's going to say the best diversion is war. You've got to set up some sort of boogeyman, and this is going to take the population. It's going to take their focus off of how bad you are, and it's going to put the focus on how bad this situation is. And temporarily, they're going to forget about inflation. They're going to forgive you, and they're going to say, okay, we need a leader, so let's just vote for this guy because he understands what's going on with this whole Ukraine situation, and therefore we don't want to take the risk of voting him or the Democrats out of office. And you may say to yourself, George, that sounds disgusting. How could any human being purposely go to war just to buy votes or just to stay in office? My rebuttal to that would be, well, you got to understand what makes a politician a politician. And as you guys know, in order to be a good politician in the United States, you have to have zero morals, no ethical backbone. You have to have zero principles. You have to have an insatiable lust for power. And you have to be a sociopath with one objective, and that's to get reelected at any cost. And that includes sacrificing American lives by going into a war that may or may not be necessary, most likely not necessary. And I'm not any type of expert on geopolitics, but I am an expert on common sense. And I'm also an expert, I guess, I want to use that term, but I know quite a bit about macroeconomics. And I also remember the Iraq War. I remember invading Iraq very, very well. I mean, I remember that vividly, watching that on television. And for some of the younger viewers, they might not recall. I think that was maybe, I don't know, 2003, 2005, something like that. But boy, I remember it well. And I remember this is exactly how the media set that up. Because first, what they did is they always start talking about how the bad guy, in this case, it was Saddam Hussein, was building up a military presence, or weapons of mass destruction. And then what I noticed back then is they always had like this character assassination on Saddam Hussein and his sons. And I always wonder, why are they doing that? Like, what difference does it make if Saddam Hussein's sons light cigars with $100 bills? Like, is that really why we should be going to war? Like, and back then, I really didn't have a political view, um, and I didn't have really a view one way or the other because that just wasn't my focus at all. But I remember asking myself, why is this relevant to whether or not we go to war with Iraq? This dude's kids lighting cigars with $100 bill, and I'm using that as a specific example for a reason because that's what the stories were. I remember that story specific. You think I'm making that up, but I'm not. I remember reading that in the newspaper or where online, this story about Uday and whatever the other son's name was, and they had this picture of the palace, and it just went on and on and on. Nothing to do with really weapons of mass destruction, but just really crucifying their character. And you see them starting to do the exact same thing with Putin. And I'm not here to say that Russia's, as pure as the driven snow. And I'm not really taking a stance as to, who's right and who's wrong. I don't want to get into that. But I do want to point out the similarities. And, well, first and foremost, I want to point out that whenever the government is trying to create a distraction, this is usually the best distraction they can create. And so you think at, okay, the administration, they're at the point where they're just going to throw out a Hail Mary. Like, and I'm using that as a reference, the end of the football game when the team is down by 6 points or something like that. And, they're at their own 20-yard line, and they just one last play, they have to throw it into the end zone and just hope that someone catches it as a last ditch effort. And I think they realize how severe the or how unpopular the administration is, and they realize that they have to. It's nuclear time, and I'm just using that. I'm using that metaphorically. They need to go to the extreme, and they've tried all the other options. Nothing's working, and inflation is such a big deal that they need this huge diversionary tactic, and this might give it to them. I'm just pointing that out first and foremost. I'm looking at the incentive structure here. And then I also want to point out that the media is starting to frame Putin the exact same way that I saw them frame Saddam Hussein. And so, and I'll show you what I'm referring to. So Biden's just saying it's tough to read. He doesn't really know. He's saying that the ball's in Putin's court. He has the next move, so they've got to sit back, wait, and see what he does. So then here is where they really start to get into this character assassination, like I saw them do with Saddam Hussein and his sons. It's unclear how much that would accomplish, however. So Biden said on Tuesday that he was willing to sanction Putin personally. And then they go on to say it's unclear how much that would accomplish, however. Putin publicly claims his salary, about 140 grand, is his only source of income, and his assets as an apartment and a few vehicles. In reality, Putin lives in a palatial, if I'm pronouncing that right, basically a palace home, larger than Buckingham Palace, and experts believe he is worth billions of dollars and that he uses the global shadow banking system to hide money. Well, how is that any different than Nancy Pelosi? Mitch McConnell? Any of the sociopaths we have in Washington, D.C.? I mean, Come on. Let's call a spade here. And so, again, my point is this is exactly what they're doing with Saddam Hussein. And I pray that the outcome isn't the same as well. Because the only people that would win in a war is going to be the politicians. Everyone else loses. But this is something that we really need to pay attention to in the weeks and months to come. Hopefully, the situation is defused. But I also want to highlight the fact that when we're going into a fourth turning, which we're in right now, and when you go into an economic depression, we were talking about the economic mass formation psychosis that Jeff Snyder and Emil Kalinowski have talked about. If that economic depression gets worse, the psychological depression gets worse, the civil and social unrest gets worse, the divisiveness gets worse, not only in the United States, but between the United States and other countries. And unfortunately, that usually goes to one place. And whether it's a war with another country or a civil war, that's why every single fourth turning ends in just this way. All right, guys. So I want to encourage you to have a wonderful afternoon and always stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. And we'll see you on the next video.